Media's Mining Weekly is interviewing Edward Stirk, the Director of Research of the World Platinum Investment Council, which has just published the latest edition of the Platinum Quarterly with an updated forecast for 2024 as a whole. Hi, Ed, it's great to chat to you once again. What specific factors are contributing to the forecasted decrease in mined platinum supply?
Well, there's a number of factors at work. I mean, obviously, close to home for you in South Africa, there are a number of restructuring announcements that have been made by the South African PGM mining companies in response to what is effectively depressed basket prices as a result of the fall in the prices of palladium and rhodium. So in sort of very basic terms, we think that the restructuring announcements are reducing operational flexibility, and so that flows into the production numbers. You've also got some operational challenges in Russia in particular, which has actually impacted much more significantly than South African output in the estimates that we're publishing today. So the challenges facing Nornickel, which is the major producer of PGMs in Russia, are both operational and also more sort of geopolitical in nature. So on the operational side, they're undertaking some maintenance of one of their more material smelters in terms of capacity. And that is something that they've kind of postponed a few times because they've generally lacked in confidence in the ability for the contractors to be able to undertake the work. But they've decided to go ahead with it now, as far as we understand. Secondly, the geopolitical factors are that they're just struggling to navigate their way through the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia in general, which are limiting their access to Western mining equipment, and also things like international banking facilities and so on that we understand are inhibiting their ability to necessarily sell the material at the volumes that they did in the past.
The Platinum Quarterly mentions that recycling supply is below historical levels. What are the main challenges facing platinum recycling today?
So it depends upon the time frame you're looking at, but recycling is running between roughly about 12 and 15% below kind of pre-COVID averages. The challenges that are facing the recycling industry are, well, there's quite a few of them. So firstly, there seems to be an ongoing shortage of end-of-life vehicles. So consumers, who are people who drive vehicles, seem to be driving their existing vehicles for longer. I think there are a couple of reasons behind that. Firstly, probably economic. We've seen quite a big increase in interest rates in the last couple of years. That makes new vehicle purchases for funding it with debt relatively more expensive. Even second-hand vehicles, again, if you're using car loans, again, also sort of somewhat more expensive. And then there's lifestyle changes. So people are driving less. Post-COVID, there's more working from home, so less miles being put on the clock every year. And newer vehicles, which I'd categorise these as, just last longer. They're better made, and so they can be driven further, and as a result, scrapped later. So there's an overall shortage of end-of-life vehicles. Added to that, we've got some headwinds from a regulatory perspective. So in North America, there's been a bit of a scandal back at the end of 2022 where a group that was aggregating spent catalytic converters and then selling them to the recyclers was raided by the FBI at the end of 2022 and accused of dealing in stolen catalytic converters. And the number's quite big. It's over $500 million worth of stolen autocats. And as a result, recyclers have thought, well, we're effectively complicit with this. So as a consequence, they've been very, very focused on trying to ensure they've got absolute provenance or proof of provenance for all the catalytic converters they're recycling. And as a result, that's just reduced the volumes that they're able to process because it's a disaggregated industry, and trying to prove that a catalytic converter has come off a vehicle that's been scrapped in a dedicated scrapyard rather than cut off the bottom of someone's car on their driveway is quite challenging. In China, you've also had some regulatory challenges where a bunch of the smaller recyclers were found to be in breach of their environmental licenses last year. And the regulator came in and basically stopped all recycling for about 3 months. They've now allowed that to restart, but with a lot of restrictions in place that have held back volumes effectively. So I suppose with recycling, the issue is that recycling rates are quite suppressed. If you think about it in platinum ounce terms, so about 500,000 to 600,000 ounces below historical norms. These are all solvable solutions. They will be solved in time. It's just a question of how long does it take to solve the problems and what's the recovery curve looking like. As things stand at the moment, we probably expect it to be back to normal within a few years. But if you push that curve back a little bit, just because these problems take a little bit longer to be solved than one might expect, it has quite a meaningful impact on the potential supply-demand dynamics and the market imbalances.
And tell us more about the recent rise in bar and coin demand in China and how this might affect the overall market balance.
Well, this is an area that we, as the World Platinum Investment Council, have been working quite hard upon. So we, as part of our organisation, works upon trying to help producers of bar and coin manufacture and sell investment products to predominantly a retail audience, but also to institutional investors as well. And so we've developed a network of partnerships in China, and these are people who are fabricating and selling bar and coin. And we've just helped them with things like design and marketing and so on, and had a great deal of success. So over the last few years, that has grown quite significantly. The numbers that we're now factoring into our platinum quarterly supply demand estimates were for 52,000 ounces last year, a forecast of 60,000 ounces this year. And that's all in the smaller bar and coin category. So this is less than 500 gram bars. On top of that, there are larger bars that we have helped facilitate the production and sale of. So just putting a rough number on last year, there's another 100,000 ounces of larger bars that were produced and sold in China that don't feature in our base case supply demand analysis. And so if you factor those into the supply demand balance, we take our deficit from 476,000 ounces, add another 100,000 ounces of larger bars onto that, you get pretty close to 600,000 ounces in terms of a supply demand deficit.
And how is the growth in India's platinum jewelry market impacting global demand? And do you see this trend continuing?
A good question. I mean, if we think about the jewelry market in general, and this is where India features significantly, it's kind of been stagnant for a number of years. So effectively, China has been the biggest end market for platinum jewelry consumption for a very long time. But for 10 years or more, that demand from China has kind of been tailing off. And that process has continued all the way through until this year, although the forecast is for a slight improvement in China this year, which will be the first year in our time series. We see the potential for some upside there. But in the last year, even the last 6 months, India has really transformed, and its demand for platinum jewelry is growing significantly. And that's serving both the domestic market, but also manufacturing in India for export to the Middle East and also to North America and the US in particular. Now, the reasons behind that are actually largely because of very successful promotional activities by our sister organisation, the Platinum Guild International. And they've identified that male jewelry in India is potentially a good market to address. They've sponsored Indian cricketers, and cricket is quite popular in India. And so they've had a great deal of success with promoting platinum jewelry. And as a result, this year, jewelry demand in India is expected to be up by between 50 to 60%. So quite a significant increase. Will that continue? I mean, it's a bit early to really sort of hang one's hat on that and say this is a trend that's going to carry on. But certainly it's encouraging, and hopefully it does continue. But I think the main thing is that as China's declined, what we're seeing is other geographies, and India in particular, are making up for that difference. In the past, I'd have said flat is the new up for platinum jewelry demand as a whole. Maybe actually we should be more enthusiastic than that now.
And despite a drop from last year's record highs, industrial demand remains strong. What are the key industrial applications driving this demand?
Well, most of the industrial subsectors are down year on year. And as you mentioned, last year was a record year for industrial demand. I think it's important to emphasise that whilst they're down year on year, actually they're still at levels that are elevated versus history. And glass in particular, although it's down from a record year last year, is an area that remains robustly strong. And a lot of those glass end uses are for the production of fiberglass, and that fiberglass is going into things like lightweighting for vehicles, and that's obviously particularly important given the additional weight of battery electric vehicles. Or it's going into the turbine blades for wind power generation. And wind power generating capacity is expected to double between last year and then 2030 globally. So, there's a lot of potential demand going forwards for more glass fiber manufacturing capacity, and that's something that that's potentially beneficial for future platinum demand. So overall, I think the industrial demand profile for platinum is looking pretty healthy. Another factor that plays into that is the hydrogen economy. And for the first time with this Platinum Quarterly, we split out a separate line item for stationary hydrogen demand. So that means electrolyzers and also stationary fuel cells and downstream uses of platinum, including hydrogenation of hydrogen carriers. So that's growing by more than 100% year over year this year, or expected to grow by more than 100% year over year. And we expect that to be an increasingly important factor of industrial demand going forwards.
And given the diverse applications of platinum, what is the forecast for long-term demand, and what factors could significantly alter these forecasts?
So I think the forecast for demand is one that's pretty encouraging. I think we've generally kind of seemed to be coming around to a higher for longer demand outlook for automotive demand. That's on the back of effectively consumers being a little bit reluctant to take the step to full battery electrification, and so they're looking for partial battery electrification, which means hybrid vehicles. But also it's the hydrogen economy. The hydrogen economy is something that is taking a bit longer to come through as expected, but towards the end of this decade it is anticipated to accelerate quite quickly. And that's on the back of increasing deployment of electrolyzers and also fuel cell electric vehicles. I'm quite confident in the destination for hydrogen demand for platinum. So we've got more than 900,000 ounces of platinum demand coming from the hydrogen industry in our numbers by 2030. But it's worth noting that the journey is going to be quite up and down. You've only got to have a couple of facilities sort of delayed by a year or so, and it means that the immediate near-term demand can change quite materially. But the reason I'm confident in the destination is that we've gone in the last 2 years from $50 billion worth of governmental subsidies to over $300 billion worth of government subsidies. So the money's there and it is being deployed. We've seen the first hydrogen auctions occur in Europe. We're seeing the first money being deployed from the Inflation Reduction Act in the US as well. So the destination's known. The journey may be a little bit up and down, but in combination, all of these factors mean that the outlook for platinum demand is one that's pretty robust.
And do you expect the green investment case for platinum to get stronger this year? And if so, why?
Yes, I do. And it really comes down to those subsidies I just mentioned for hydrogen. So we are seeing euros beginning to be spent from those subsidies. And so that's translating into actual infrastructure being built that's starting this year. And I think in terms of the kind of green credentials, the bit that comes through all that is if there's any skepticism whether the hydrogen economy is really going to happen or not. Now, the skeptics can see that the money is being spent and things are actually being built. And that really helps cement the understanding that this is happening.
And finally, Ed, what in your view should be the biggest takeaway from the latest Platinum Quarterly and the updated forecasts for 2024 as a whole?
I think the biggest takeaway, and this is perhaps a little bit of a step back from the green credentials, is that we are seeing this consumer reluctance to go for full battery electrification. So there is a gradual downgrade to expectations in terms of the pace of battery electrification of the drivetrain. This is going to happen. Let's not beat around the bush. And it will gradually lead to an erosion of internal combustion engine production numbers. And obviously that translates into PGM demand. For platinum, of course, that erosion would be replaced with time with fuel cell electric vehicles. What we're seeing is, if we look at last year as an example, last year was the first year where battery electric vehicle production numbers fell short of expectations. So at the beginning of the year, 11 million units were forecast in light-duty vehicle terms, and it ended up being only 10 million units. We're seeing downgrades to the numbers for this year. So at the beginning of the year, 14 million units were forecast in terms of battery electric vehicle production numbers, and that's now been downgraded to less than 13. And yet, total light-duty vehicle numbers are up. And so the difference is being made up by internal combustion engine vehicles that contain platinum. Now, the majority of those are hybrid vehicles. So, it's partial battery electrification, and including the fastest growing segment, and this is mainly in China, are extended range electric vehicles. So these are battery electric vehicles with internal combustion engines. And the internal combustion engine, unlike in a plug-in hybrid, can't drive the wheels directly. All it does is act as a generator to charge the battery. And these things can have ranges in excess of 1,000 kilometers with a fully charged battery and an internal combustion engine. Now, obviously, most of the time you're driving in fully electric, you plug in your car for short journeys, that's enough. So it's only really using the generator for much longer journeys. So your emissions profile is significantly reduced. So it's a good transition technology, but you still need to treat those tailpipe emissions, and that means that you have to put platinum group metals into the exhaust treatment system. So we think that all told, this trend is probably going to continue beyond this year, and it also helps the sort of skeptical next cohort of consumers to make the step towards battery electrification, albeit in a staged fashion. But it also means higher for longer demand from the automotive industry for PGMs and platinum in particular. So, overall, it's encouraging for medium to longer term demand.
That was Creamer Media's Mining Weekly, speaking to Edward Stirk, the Director of Research of the World Platinum Investment Council, which has just published the latest edition of the Platinum Quarterly with an updated forecast for 2024 as a whole.